The gunshot cracked through the air like lightning splitting a tree. Rachel Green was halfway through her morning coffee when it hit, sharp, sudden, wrong. She dropped the mug. It shattered against the front porch boards as she bolted upright, heart lurching in her chest. Then came the scream. High. Piercing. Raw. Mom! Rachel didn't think. Her boots hit the steps before her brain caught up. She sprinted across the dirt path, past the chicken run, through the pasture gate, breath catching on thorns of dread. And there, in the open clearing beneath the cottonwoods, her world stopped. Ellie was on her knees. Her little girl, only 9 years old, was crumpled in the grass, arms wrapped around the still body of Peanut, the miniature horse she trained and loved for 2 years. The little brown and white mare wasn't moving. Blood seeped into her cream-colored flank. They shot her! Ellie sobbed, rocking against the mare's side. Mom, they shot her! Rachel dropped beside them, hands trembling as she reached for Peanut's neck. Nothing. The warmth was fading fast. Her vision blurred with tears, but rage was already boiling beneath the grief. That's when she looked up, and saw them. 2 men in camouflage, rifles slung across their backs, stepped casually through a torn section of the wire fence like they owned the place. One of them, stocky, chewing jerky, laughed. Better not be touching our deer, he barked, pointing at the horse. Rachel stood, shaking with fury. That's not a deer. That's my daughter's therapy horse. You killed her. What the hell are you doing on my land? The taller one shrugged. We had permission. Some lady from the HOA said it was okay. Her pulse hammered. What HOA? This is private land. She said it was part of the community green zone. The other muttered. Said we could hunt? Rachel's breath caught as her eyes drifted past them, toward the hill, and there she was. Marsha Delaney. Standing by the old fence post in a powder blue blouse and wide-brimmed hat like she was posing for a damn real estate brochure. She didn't flinch. Didn't move. Just stood there, arms folded, mouth twisted in a smug little smirk. Ellie let out a broken wail that shattered the last of Rachel's restraint. She turned back to her daughter, knelt, and cradled her tight. Go inside, baby, she whispered. Tell Uncle Ryan to call the sheriff. Ellie looked up through tear-blurred eyes. What are you going to do? Rachel stood slowly, eyes locked on Marsha. I'm going to get answers. And this time, nobody was walking away clean. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later. By then, the hunters were gone, slipped into the tree line and vanished like ghosts. Rachel barely spoke. She stood with her arms folded, jaw clenched, staring down at the torn fence line while Deputy Owens took statements and snapped photos. Ellie was inside with Uncle Ryan, who had rushed over from town the moment he got the call. Her cries had quieted to soft, uneven breaths. Rachel had kissed her forehead, promised everything would be okay, and then stepped back outside with fire in her chest. But it wasn't just today's fire. It had started long before. They'd bought the ranch 2 years earlier, after Rachel's husband, David, was killed in a construction accident. One moment he was there. The next, a scaffold gave way and her world fell apart. Ellie stopped speaking for almost 3 months. She couldn't sleep without waking up screaming. Therapy helped a little, but nothing compared to what Peanut did. The tiny mare wasn't just a pet, she was Ellie's anchor. Her peace. So Rachel sold their suburban home in Bozeman, packed everything, and moved them out to rural Montana, to the 10-acre ranch she and David had once dreamed of retiring on. It was quiet, private, and far removed from the noise of city life. Most importantly, it wasn't governed by an HOA. At least, that's what she thought. The subdivision across the road, Cedar Run Estates, had grown over the past year. First a dozen homes, then 20 more. Sleek black fences, speed bumps, matching mailboxes. Then came the signs. Private community, HOA managed. Rachel ignored it at first. Her ranch had its own deed, its own access road, and was completely outside the platted boundary. But Marsha Delaney didn't seem to care about boundaries. She showed up one afternoon last spring, unannounced, smiling wide and holding a welcome packet. "We like to keep the neighborhood consistent," she said. "Just a few guidelines to keep things pleasant." Rachel politely declined. A week later, a note appeared in her mailbox. "Your perimeter fence violates community aesthetics." Then came a second. "Your livestock may present sanitation risks. Please register all animals with HOA Pet Management." Rachel laughed. "Pet management?" She tossed it in the trash. Then the real signs came. Literally. One morning, she found a freshly nailed plastic sign on the back gate. It read, "Cedar Run Community Greenbelt, Wildlife Access Trail. HOA approved, entry permitted." Rachel tore it down, furious. The nerve. Her land wasn't some public nature walk. The next day, she found tire tracks near the creek, boot prints around the hay shed, and crushed soda cans near the barn, none of them hers. And worse, Ellie started asking, "Mom, who are those men by the fence?" Rachel began checking their security footage more often. At least once a week, strange figures passed near the back edge of the property, some with binoculars, some carrying coolers. Always staying just outside the house's line of sight. Always close enough to make her skin crawl. She called the sheriff's office once. "Unless they're caught trespassing," Owens had said, "there's not much we can do." Marsha never admitted anything directly. But once, at the farmer's market, she leaned in and said with a syrupy smile, "You know, Rachel, if you're not using all that land, the community might as well enjoy it." Rachel had stared her down. "It's not your community. It's my home." Marsha just smiled wider. "Not for long." Rachel didn't know what Marsha meant that day. But now, kneeling in the dirt beside Ellie's fallen horse, she finally did. And she was going to make damn sure Marsha regretted it. Rachel didn't wait for the sheriff's report. The very next morning, she drove straight to Cedar Run's community office, an oversized cottage dressed up to look quaint, with a white picket fence and HOA headquarters, carved into a fake wooden sign. It was as plastic as the people running it. She didn't knock. She pushed open the glass door and marched inside. Marsha Delaney sat behind a reception desk, sipping from a cup that read, "Boss Lady." Her powder blue blouse was crisp, her hair immaculately curled. If she was surprised to see Rachel, she didn't show it. "Oh, Rachel," she said, setting her cup down like she was greeting an old friend. "I was just thinking about you. How's that sweet daughter of yours?" Rachel slammed a folded printout onto the desk, a screenshot from the drone footage showing two hunters stepping through the broken fence. "They said you gave them permission? Told them this was community land?" Marsha barely glanced at the photo. "Oh, that? I may have mentioned it was accessible green space. The whole area is zoned for shared outdoor use." "No, it isn't," Rachel snapped. "This is my land. I have the deed, the boundaries, everything. You know that." Marsha's smile thinned. "It's just land, Rachel. And honestly, that little horse? It was an accident. These things happen." Rachel's fists clenched. "Her name was Peanut. She was a therapy animal. She helped my daughter sleep. She helped her speak." "Well," Marsha said with a dismissive shrug, "children are resilient. She'll bounce back. It's not like it was a real horse anyway." Rachel stood frozen. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and fury. "Just a pony," Marsha said, reaching for her mug again. "Let's not be so dramatic." Rachel leaned in, her voice low and cold. "You unleashed armed strangers onto our property, and now my child can't stop crying. That's not dramatic. That's criminal." Marsha's eyes narrowed for a moment, but then the mask snapped back into place. "If you're so concerned, take it up with the sheriff. I already did. And I'm coming after everyone responsible. Starting with you." Back at the ranch, Ellie hadn't moved from her room. The door was cracked just enough for Rachel to see her, curled up under the blanket, clutching Peanut's old pink halter in her small hands. On the bedside table, she'd placed the horse's worn leather saddle, the one she'd practiced with every day for her school's therapy showcase next month. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't spoken a word since the night before. Rachel knelt by the bed. "Sweetheart?" she whispered. Ellie didn't respond. Rachel reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "We're going to make this right. I promise." Ellie finally looked at her, eyes swollen and red. "She didn't even care," she said quietly. "She laughed, Mom." Rachel swallowed hard. "I know. She said peanut didn't matter. She was wrong." Ellie stared at the ceiling. "Then why is she still smiling?" Rachel stood slowly, fists curling at her sides. "Not for long." That night, Rachel stayed up late combing through security footage. Every angle. Every clip. She copied files to a flash drive and labeled each one carefully. She drafted a list, names, times, statements. By midnight, she had a folder on her desktop titled, "Justice for Peanut." She stared at the screen, her reflection dim in the monitor. Behind her, Ellie slept, still curled around that pink halter like it was the last thread holding her world together. Rachel's jaw set. They'd taken something innocent. Something sacred. Now it was her turn. Rachel was back at the sheriff's office by 8 o'clock the next morning, a flash drive in hand and a fire in her eyes. Deputy Owens met her in the hallway with a tired nod. "You weren't kidding," he said, leading her to a small office in the back. "Let's see what you've got." They plugged in the drive, and Rachel walked him through the footage. First, the stable camera, which showed the moment the hunters crept onto the property, rifles slung over their shoulders like it was some lazy Saturday outing. Then the barnside motion camera, which caught something even more disturbing, the two men stopping near the western fence line, digging a shallow hole, and burying a red and white cooler before they left. "Rewind that," Owens said, leaning forward. Rachel paused the video as one hunter pulled out a rolled-up paper, glanced at it, then tucked it into the cooler before shoving it into the ground. Owens let out a low whistle. What the hell were they hiding? Later that afternoon, a search warrant was granted. A deputy accompanied Rachel back to the ranch and helped her dig near the fence. It didn't take long. The cooler was still there, packed in dry dirt beneath a layer of broken twigs. Inside, bags of raw meat, strips of jerky vacuum-sealed with handwritten tags, elk, boar, venison. All unlicensed. All illegal. And between them, folded neatly, was a laminated permit with a stamped HOA seal. Rachel unfolded it carefully, her heart pounding. It read, Cedar Run HOA, Community Hunting Zone Access. Authorized by Marsha Delaney, HOA President. Boundary coordinates, West Creek Line to East Ridge Gate. Beneath that, Marsha's signature, scrawled in looping cursive like it was just another formality. Rachel stared at it, barely breathing. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Organized. She took photos of everything, then packed it all back up for the sheriff's department. That evening, she sat in Owens's office again, this time with Sheriff Tomlin present, a thick-set man with a bald head and the patience of a granite wall. "We ran those names," he said, tapping a printout on his desk. "Your hunters? They're part of a poaching ring we've been tracking across 3 counties. Selling illegal game, transporting across state lines, forging permits. Until now, we hadn't been able to pin them to any specific location." He turned the printout toward her. "Until now." Rachel's throat was dry. "And Marsha?" Owens slid a folder forward. "We're still digging, but it looks like she's been handing out those permits for months. We've found 5 different versions. Same formatting, same fake HOA stamps. She's created her own access system." "Why?" Rachel asked. "For what?" Sheriff Tomlin leaned back. "Best guess? Money. She's charging these guys to hunt on land that isn't hers. You've got 10 acres, most of it wooded. She figured you wouldn't notice, or wouldn't fight back." Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. "They shot a therapy horse. My daughter hasn't spoken to anyone in days." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "We're not letting it slide." Owens nodded. With this footage, the buried cooler, and that forged document, we've got the start of a real case. But fair warning, Marsha's got lawyers, HOA money, political friends. Rachel folded her arms. Good. I've got truth. And a little girl who's braver than most adults I know. The room fell quiet for a beat. Then Sheriff Tomlin said, "Let's burn this thing from the roots." By the weekend, Ellie had finally spoken again. Just a few words. Just a whisper. But it was enough. "I want to build her something," she told Rachel, clutching Peanut's halter in her hands. "So people remember her." Rachel knelt beside her and nodded. "Then we'll build it together." And so they did. With help from Uncle Ryan and a few kind neighbors, Mr. Flores from down the road, a pair of teenage twins who'd once taken riding lessons with Ellie, they put up a small white archway near the pasture fence. A hand-painted sign hung across the top. "Peanut's Place, Forever Our Light." They placed her saddle on a wooden stand beneath it, wrapped it in a weatherproof cover, and surrounded the base with wildflowers. Ellie chose a smooth, flat creek stone to rest beneath the arch. "That's her thinking rock," she said quietly. "She used to sit next to me when I read there." The memorial wasn't grand, but it was sacred. And for the first time in days, Rachel saw something flicker behind Ellie's eyes again, something fragile, but alive. It lasted exactly 2 nights. Rachel woke just after 3 a.m. to the smell of smoke. She sat bolt upright, heart racing, as flames flickered through the bedroom window. "Ellie, Ryan, get up!" she shouted, grabbing her flashlight and sprinting for the door. Out in the field, Peanut's memorial was ablaze, orange flames leaping high into the dark sky, eating through the wood like it was paper. The saddle crackled, melting into blackened leather. The flowers were already ash. "No, no, no!" Rachel whispered, barefoot and breathless, as she tried to smother the fire with a soaked blanket, but it was too late. The whole structure had been doused in something accelerant, gasoline, maybe lighter fluid. It burned too clean, too fast. Ellie stood on the porch, trembling in Ryan's arms, her pajama sleeves wet with tears. "Why do they hate us so much?" she sobbed. "Why would anyone do that?" Rachel couldn't answer. She knelt in the ash, the wind stinging her face, and swore under her breath. This wasn't carelessness. This was vengeance. The sheriff's office arrived within the hour. Deputy Owens examined the scorched earth and found what Rachel had already seen: the melted base of a red plastic gas can, and a partial footprint in the dirt, a woman's boot heel with a distinctive ridge pattern. Rachel didn't have to guess. She had upgraded the surveillance system after the shooting. The back-facing camera caught it all, a shadowy figure in a long coat and scarf stepping up to the memorial with a canister in hand. She wore gloves, but her scarf gave her away. Bright red silk. Monogrammed. MD. Rachel handed the footage to Owens without saying a word. He watched it in silence, then muttered, "She's cooked." But the next morning, it was Rachel who got the knock on the door. A man in a cheap gray suit handed her an envelope. "You've been served," he said flatly, then turned and walked back to his car. Inside the envelope, a formal complaint from Cedar Run HOA. Violation of land use regulations. Unauthorized structure on shared use space. Unlicensed therapy animal training. Attached, a demand for $5,000 per day in fines until removal and compliance. Rachel stared at the letter, then at Ellie's face as she read it over her shoulder. "She's not just trying to erase Peanut," Rachel whispered. "She's trying to erase us." 3 days after the fire, a notice appeared in Rachel's mailbox. Cedar Run HOA Emergency Meeting, Agenda, Community Land Compliance Vote. Buried in the fine print was the real bombshell. Proposal to seize and repurpose underutilized shared green space adjacent to Cedar Run Estates. That was her land. Her ranch. "They're going to vote to take it," Rachel muttered, hands trembling. "They're not even hiding it anymore." "What do we do?" Ryan asked. Rachel glanced at Ellie, who sat at the kitchen table with Peanut's halter in her lap. The light in her eyes had dimmed again, but this time, There was something new behind it, resolve. I want to speak, Ellie said. At the meeting. I want to tell them what Marsha did. Rachel knelt beside her. Sweetheart, that room will be full of angry people. Grown-ups who don't want to listen. Then they need to hear it even more. The meeting was held in Cedar Run's community center, a sterile, polished room with folding chairs and a podium set beneath a gold-framed HOA mission statement. It was already full when Rachel, Ryan, and Ellie arrived. Cars lined the narrow street outside. Inside, it buzzed like a nest of hornets. Marsha stood near the front, flanked by board members in matching polo shirts. She smiled as Rachel entered, but her eyes stayed cold. Rachel led Ellie toward the front row, but before they could take their seats, a tall man with a clipboard stepped in front of them. I'm sorry, he said in a rehearsed tone. Minors aren't permitted to speak during HOA proceedings. Emergency bylaw passed this afternoon. What? Rachel snapped. She's here to tell the truth. Rules are rules, he said. No exceptions. Behind him, Marsha sauntered over, voice dripping syrup. We wouldn't want her to feel overwhelmed. These meetings can get tense. Ellie stepped forward. I'm not scared. Marsha bent down with that familiar fake smile. Sweetheart, it was just a pony. Let the adults handle it. Rachel's hand shot out and caught her daughter's shoulder. Go sit down with Uncle Ryan, she said through clenched teeth. I'll take it from here. The meeting began with a rehearsed speech from Marsha about community safety, cohesive development, and reclaiming underutilized land. When she announced the vote to absorb the ranch into Cedar Run's jurisdiction, the crowd stirred. Hold it, Rachel said, standing. Gasps rippled through the room as she walked to the front, a thick manila folder clutched in her hand. I have evidence, proof this HOA has no legal claim over my property, and that Marsha Delaney falsified permits, manipulated boundaries, and incited criminal acts. Marsha laughed, waving her hand. Let's not derail things with baseless claims. But Rachel didn't flinch. She pulled out a large plat map, held it high. This is the original deed survey, county certified. My land has never been part of Cedar Run. Then she held up the printed hunting permit, complete with Marsha's signature. And this? She tossed it onto the table. Issued to poachers who trespassed and shot my daughter's therapy animal. A voice rose from the crowd. I can back that up, said a woman from the side aisle. She stepped forward, Joanne Price, a former HOA board member who had mysteriously resigned months earlier. She pressured us to redraw the maps. I have emails. She threatened to remove anyone who didn't comply. Rachel turned toward the back. Deputy Owens? He stepped forward, holding up a tablet. We have video footage. And a recorded confession. This isn't a vote. It's a cover-up. The room erupted. People shouted. Chairs scraped. A man near the back yelled. You told us it was abandoned land. Another. You lied about the fire too. The board fumbled. Marsha tried to speak, but Gerald, the meek HOA president, banged his gavel. Motion suspended, he declared. This vote is postponed pending legal review. Type yes if you support Rachel and Ellie. Type no if you think the HOA had any right at all. Marsha's face turned crimson. You can't just. But no one was listening anymore. Outside, Ellie waited on the steps, hugging the halter tighter. Did it work? She asked as Rachel walked out. Rachel knelt and smiled. Better than I hoped. The hearing room at the County Civic Center was packed. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder with ranchers, students, and city residents, drawn by headlines that now stretched far beyond Montana. HOA president linked to poaching ring and arson. One read. Mother and daughter fight back after tragic loss. But everyone in that room had really come for one thing. To hear Ellie speak. After the explosive HOA meeting, the county board had expedited a public hearing. When Rachel filed a formal complaint, armed with footage, maps, and sworn statements, the judge granted Ellie the right to speak under special protection as a minor witness. She sat in the front row that night, legs swinging just above the floor, her flannel dress neatly pressed and boots polished. Peanut's pink halter hung from her shoulder like a satchel. Rachel knelt beside her and squeezed her hand. "You ready?" Ellie nodded. "I think so." When her name was called, the crowd hushed. She climbed the 3 short steps to the podium, carefully placed the halter on the wooden surface, and unfolded a piece of paper. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but steady. "My name is Ellie Green. I'm 9 years old. I live on a ranch that someone tried to take from us." She paused, scanning the room. "I had a miniature horse named Peanut. She wasn't just mine. She helped me when I couldn't talk after my dad died. She helped me feel brave again. She made me laugh. She made me want to be outside. She helped me live." A few people dabbed at their eyes. "One day, someone gave strangers permission to walk onto our land with guns. They weren't supposed to be there. They said she looked like a deer. But she wasn't. She had a pink halter. She always wore it." Ellie touched the halter gently. "After she died, we built her a memorial. Someone burned it down. Then they tried to make us pay money for building it. They said we weren't allowed to grieve." The silence in the room turned to steel. "I'm just a kid. But I know what's right and wrong. And this? What they did to Peanut. What they did to my mom. It was wrong. And I don't want it to happen to anyone else." She folded her paper and looked directly at the judge. "Please don't let them hurt anyone else." When she stepped down, the room erupted into a standing ovation. Even the court clerk clapped. "If you believe Ellie was braver than most adults," comment one. Later that night, the sheriff placed Marsha Delaney in handcuffs outside her gated home. News cameras caught every second. Gone was the powder blue and pearls. She wore sweatpants, a windbreaker, and a face pale with disbelief. "Marsha Delaney," the deputy announced, "you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, criminal trespass, and arson." Rachel and Ellie watched the footage from their porch swing. "She's gone," Rachel whispered. Ellie leaned against her. "She said Peanut didn't matter." Rachel kissed her forehead. "And now the whole world knows she did." 6 months passed. Winter melted into spring, and with it, the last traces of smoke and scorched earth finally faded from the field. But in its place, something new began to grow. Peanut's Haven opened on the first day of April. A quiet ceremony marked the start. No microphones, no press, just neighbors and friends who had stood by the greens through the storm. A new cedar arch stood near the old pasture, wrapped in wildflowers and solar lights. Across the top, hand-painted letters read, "Peanut's Haven, a place to heal." Ellie stood at the front, a little taller now, her voice a little surer. Beside her stood Buttercup, a honey-colored miniature mare donated by a veteran horse rescue group. She wasn't Peanut, but she followed Ellie with the same gentle loyalty. Rachel spoke to the group gathered in the grass. "This was never about revenge," she said. "It was about peace. About protecting a place where children, and adults, can feel safe again." And they did. Within weeks, word of Peanut's Haven spread. Families from across the state began visiting, kids with anxiety, veterans with PTSD, parents just searching for somewhere quiet and safe. Therapists reached out to volunteer. Schools partnered for field trips. Even the sheriff's department sent troubled teens to volunteer at the barn. The town, once divided, began to stitch itself together in the soft shadow of a little horse who had never spoken, but had changed everything. A few months later, a letter arrived from the county courthouse. The Green Ranch was now designated a protected agricultural and therapeutic zone, permanently exempt from HOA jurisdiction, development claims, or hunting access. The fight was over. Ellie helped Rachel frame the letter and hang it in the barn, right beside a photograph of Peanut in her pink halter. Below it, they placed a stone marker carved with the words that had become the heart of their journey. "Even the smallest voice can lead the loudest change." On the first anniversary of Peanut's death, they held a candlelight vigil. Dozens came, neighbors, children, reporters, even 2 of the board members who had once voted against them. They brought flowers, notes, and soft songs. Buttercup stood calmly as Ellie read from her notebook. Peanut taught me that it's okay to be small, she said. Because sometimes small things do the biggest things of all. The crowd stood in silence as candles flickered across the field. Some whispered her name, Peanut, 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 like a lullaby for the land. And in a quiet cell 2 states away, Marsha Delaney watched it all unfold on the local news. But for the first time in her life, the world wasn't listening to her. It was listening to the little girl she tried to silence. And that was the loudest justice of all. If this story moved you, hit share so more people hear Ellie's voice. In the end, this story isn't just about a horse, a ranch, or even an HOA gone too far. It's about the power of standing up when it matters most. Rachel fought not just to protect her land, but to defend her daughter's right to grieve, to heal, and to be heard. And Ellie, just 9 years old, reminded us all that you don't need to be loud to speak the truth, and you don't need to be big to make a difference. In a world where power often bullies silence, Peanut's haven was built on the belief that peace is worth defending, and that kindness, when protected, can outlast cruelty. This story teaches us that community isn't made through control, it's built through compassion. And when lies and greed try to silence the innocent, it only takes one steady voice, one small person with courage, to echo across an entire town. So wherever you are, whatever you're facing, remember Ellie. Remember Peanut. Because even the smallest voice, when rooted in truth, can change everything.